To begin with, my name is Evan Sapia, a member of the Education Committee of the CFA Society Ghana. On behalf of the executive of the society, the organizers of this event, I warmly welcome you all to this webinar titled the Half-Year Economic Review Series. We appreciate your efforts and the time that you have sacrificed to attend the program. And I can assure you, with the team that we have assembled to help us with the discussion, you will leave here satisfied. We will greatly benefit ourselves. To begin with, we all recall that the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, presented the 2022 mid-year budget review some few weeks ago. It is clear from the presentation, and as we are all aware, that the times we are in is a difficult one. This is because inflation is at a record high. Cost of borrowing for businesses and household has increased. The cedi has depreciated sharply, and the economic outlook has darkened significantly. The words of the Finance Minister, as summarized, or the words of the Finance Minister in the budget, the mid-year budget, summarizes the concern that you as finance and investment professional have. And I quote him, and he said this: "This is not what we envisioned the economy to be. This is not what we planned and worked hard for. Our recent challenges have overtaken us." Yes, the truth of the matter is that the times we are in is hard. It's therefore appropriate for us to pause and ask ourselves some important questions, such as, what is the history of this economy? And how did we get here? These are some and other questions that the webinar seeks to answer or clarify. So in summary, I would say that the webinar will touch on Ghana's economic situation, the ongoing IMF discussion, expectations on key macro indicators, and the global economy. But before I leave, for the main reason why we are here, let's remind ourselves of these important reminders. There will be Q&A session, and for that matter, I encourage you to jot down your questions and put them in the chat box, and we have a team ready to assist so that these questions will be answered. And again, we want to remind you to mute your microphones. Lastly, just this year, the CFA Society Ghana had its maiden forecast dinner. And another one is planned for early next year. But to prepare for that, we will be submitting to you a survey that we will want you and encourage you to respond to. And you are to predict certain key macroeconomic indicators. And those who will be that exact, or who will be able to predict well, will be recognized and rewarded during the next forecast dinner. So to begin the program, I will want to invite our moderator for this section, and he is Adjei Boateng. He is a CFA charter holder and the chief investment officer at Black Star Group. Adjei Boateng is a key industry player, and he's also concerned about what is happening in the economy because these things affect his. To begin with, let's invite him. So, Mr. Boateng, you have our attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans, and can I warmly welcome you all for taking your time to join this call. You know, as you are all aware, the world is going through very, very difficult times at the moment. We have just in the last 2 years just come out of COVID. We started seeing a huge uprising inflation as the world started opening up at the beginning of last year. At the beginning of this year, we encountered, obviously, this Russia-Ukraine war, which has caused a huge amount of sort of problem worldwide. Inflation is everywhere, and every economy is struggling. But I think if you are in Ghana, you're feeling the pain a lot more because of where inflation and other things are at the moment. Now, to welcome our speaker, I think I for one, I'm very, very much looking forward to hearing our speaker speak. His name is Kwabena Gyan Kwakye. He is an economist with the World Bank. Kwabena's entire working life has involved macroeconomic reporting and economic policy analysis, public finance, financial management, poverty reduction, gender-related issues, employment and social protection. Since joining the World Bank in January 2017, he's impacted the same space, more particularly in economic policy, domestic resource mobilization, and public financial management, as he's helped deliver development operation, and currently serves as a co-tax leader at the World Bank's investment project finance. He's currently an economist based in Accra, and part of the macroeconomic trade and investment global practice of the World Bank, working with teams globally to help countries achieve their development goals without creating future debt problems. Collaborating with several international institutions to provide holistic views and suggest intervention to fiscal authorities and providing assistance to trade. Kwabena has real interest in terms of the broader World Bank goals in terms of eradicating poverty through shared prosperity, through employment, and remained a great influence on his ambition to promote development by influencing public policy. I think from where he sits in a very unique space where he has the local experience, but also being able to collaborate with global teams worldwide in order to be able to sort of take an outsider's view while still inside the country. So, Kwabena, you're most welcome. Over to you, Kwabena. Kwabena, can you hear me? Ladies and gentlemen, just let's bear with me a minute while we get Kwabena online. Ladies and gentlemen, just while we are connecting Kwabena, just bear with us a few moments. So while we wait for Kwabena connection to come back online, so as I mentioned at the start of the year, what we've ultimately observed is that like the problem we're seeing pretty much started at the beginning of the pandemic. So globally, what we saw was that because of the entire shutdown, when the entire problem started from energy, when you as Kwabena will hopefully point out, energy is the bedrock and the foundation of everything we do. Without energy, nothing moves. So basically, because of the pandemic and because everything was shut down, when the economies around the world started opening up, what we observed was the fact that there wasn't enough supply to meet the demand. And as such, there was this inflationary pressure on all the world economy. So the net effect was that also, and something that ran parallel to that problem that we observed was that the world is heavily dependent on China. And because of also the COVID, the entire China economy was obviously shut down. So you ended up having like a supply chain bottleneck issues as well. And then we fast forward that. And in fact, when you take a step back and look at our economy in terms of how things plays out, a lot of things starts with moving things from the rural areas in terms of agriculture and into the big cities, right? So when we have a scenario where the entire economy is shut down, we get to a scenario where there's a lot more pressure in terms of petrol prices, which we saw. And because of our over reliance on imports in terms of refined oil products, the end result was that we saw prices moving everywhere. But like I said, this was not unique to us. So fast forward that, we got to a scenario where we saw things started stabilizing, and then we got to a position where Russia and Ukraine war also intervened, right? And when you look at how the world economy is structured and how we are all interconnected, it quickly became apparent that a huge amount of the world wheat and other sort of commodities were heavily relying on, was dependent on what was happening in Russia and Ukraine. So I noticed that Kwabena just joined. Kwabena, Kwabena, can you hear me? Hello, Kwabena, can you hear me? Kwabena, can you hear me if you can?
Yes, I can hear you.
So I've just been holding the space while you get your connection sorted. So I was just briefing everyone in terms of what's been happening in the world economy, in terms of from inflation to where we are with Russia and Ukraine war. So over to you, Kwabena.
Okay, thank you. So hello everyone. Sorry for the hitch. My computer just crashed just at the most important time. So I will just share my slides and continue from where Adjei ended. So can everyone see my slide?
Yes, we can, but I think it's not full screen, so you might need to change
It's
the screen.
not? Okay. Hold on.
That's much better, Kwabena.
Is it okay? Okay, great. Just a moment, please. Okay. So are we all good?
Yes, Kwabena, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I think Adjei started off. So basically our conversation today, I try to put in simple terms 5 outline or pointers for our outline, the context from where we are coming from, where basically we will look at how Ghana has fared over the years as far as the economy is concerned. And then we'll move on, we will narrow down to the recent developments, probably 2 to 3 years ago. And then I try to more or less link it up with how Ghana has fared together, against its peers, what we call our peers, especially in Africa. And then, of course, we are in the mid-year of 2022, so I'll bring in some few highlights of the 2022 budget, which will set the ball rolling as far as the outlook is concerned. So without wasting much time, in setting the context, we can say that looking at the big picture for Ghana, Ghana has really made a significant progress since the return to democracy. We have seen real per capita growth, increasing compared to its peers for the past, say, 20 years. We've seen national poverty going down. For example, if you look at the 1991 poverty of 52%, went all the way down to 23 and still going down. You've also seen the Gini in terms of inequality, well, not doing well recently, but it actually improved in the first part of, let's say, in the first decade after we achieved, or we went back to democracy. Now, at the same time, we want to look at, this slide is seeking to look at our development trajectory, where we've come from. And we say that, well, Ghana has been a rising star. We've still been rising. And I think that this is something that we've said many years ago, and it's still relevant to say that amongst its peers, Ghana seemed to be a star among its peers as far as our development trajectory is concerned. So, for example, if you look at from 1957 all the way to 2022, we saw after independence, where we had some very low growth, and then of course after 84 we had stagnation. We all remember whenever we say 83, we know what really we can think of Ghana as far as 83 is concerned, when we had the famine and depression as far as Ghana is concerned. And then of course from 1993 we started warming up. That was right after we went back to democracy. And then mid 2000s we had growth taking off rapidly, and of course we've had some crisis in between from that time till date. If you look at the growth accounting as in what really is pushing for growth or influencing growth over the years, you realize that in the early part we had seen capital injection. When I say early part, between let's say, the 70s, but then of course productivity was quite low, so that is represented by total productivity. And then of course moving on, we saw capital injection coming in right after 1991, and this was at its height averagely between 2005 and 2012. So you realize that at some point we were depending more on the outcome of, for example, schooling, the outcome of labor intensive work, and so on. But then right when we started depending more on the natural resource related growth, we also ended up depending more on capital injection. So this just basically to paint the picture, to set the context where we've come from as far as the Ghanaian economy is concerned. The same way, we realize that agriculture is giving way to services over the years, meaning our resources are more or less has jumped right away from agriculture into services. But then we know that theoretically we would want labor shifting from agriculture, which is primary, into secondary, which is industry more, so that it follows that trend. But then for Ghana, we have seen that shift moving from agriculture right into services. Of course, if you want to discuss this, it will be a whole day or a whole session in terms of how come you've seen labor moving into services, and what kind of quality services that we are looking at, or what kind of quality labor that we are thinking of. But I think we can end it here, and maybe if there's any question into that, we can delve more into it. Now, in the same way, I mean, still setting the context, we've seen poverty reduction has been slowed, especially from 2012 till date. We've also seen some inequalities widening, especially poor regions like the upper regions. You can talk of the northern, upper east, and so on. I'm still using the old nomenclature as far as because this is how the data is actually presented. Old nomenclature from, the 10 regions instead of the 16 regions. Now, in the same way, this slide is actually looking at how services provided, quality services, quality of living actually coincide with poverty. So we realize that when we talk of urban areas, that comes with good quality services, good hospitals, schools. They actually coincide with the areas that have higher or lower poverty. So basically, when we look at Ghana, you see that the northern part, which is marked red in the left map, are the areas that have low services, and so on and so forth. Now, fast forward, we say that I would say prior to the pandemic, that's 2020, the year before 2020, we are seeing Ghana be one of the fastest growing economies, average of 7% growth per year, for example, between 2017 and 2019. This followed a period of some economic turbulence. We remember we discovered oil, and actually we launched commercial production around 2011. So that marked the peak of our oil production and also the growth of the economy. But then, of course, also we saw some consistently tight monetary policy, which actually drove reduction in annual inflation, for example, from 14% in 2015 to 7.1% in 2019. We had robust export growth, which saw gold, cocoa, and oil put the merchandise trade balance into surplus, and which also contributed into reducing the current account deficit. So all these developments occurred right up to 2019, just before the COVID-19 pandemic. But then, of course, in 2019, we saw these developments halted, and especially in terms of the growth, we saw, for example, that the second and third quarter of 2020, we had a negative growth. So we had a recession within 2020, but luckily, overall growth for 2020 was positive, just 0.5% growth. This is compared to the original projection of more than 5% that we had before the pandemic set in 2020. Now, the COVID, this is also still setting the agenda in terms of where we've come from. There are many ways that the pandemic affected us. I've mentioned growth. We can also talk of the fiscal, where the government ended up introducing a lot of expenditure lines to actually curb the pandemic. You all remember the COVID-19 fund trying to keep the the economy, the lights on, businesses and so on, supporting businesses and so on. At the same time, that was the time we also had quite low revenues. So at the end of the day, what happens is we have wider gap. Government had to borrow more in 2020 to actually foot that high, exceptionally high expenditure, whilst revenues were not coming in. So we ended up in a fiscal deficit of 15.2% in 2020. I'll skip here because Adjei, I believe, made some points here. This particular slide is basically painting the broad picture as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned. We've seen global growth, which accelerated 6.1% in 2021. Now, I mean, in terms of projection for 2022, we are looking at quite low projection, below 3% now. Beginning of the year, around, I think the first quarter, we are projecting 3.6% in 2022, but these have been revised downwards based on the development in terms of all the negative repercussions as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned. So I will not spend too much time here. Of course, with Ghana, specifically, we are also experiencing the brunt of the Russia-Ukraine war. We've seen global prices of several key commodities going down, especially food, fuels, and fertilizers, metals. Those of us who are into or who relate or who actually have interest in the real estate sector would know how much it's costly now to put up a building and so on. So all these would say partly have been determined by the Russian-Ukraine crisis. Also, in terms of the financial markets, we know that the cedi has been depreciating quite rapidly, and of course we can have much detailed discussion in the subsequent slides, so on. Now, having said all these, this slide is trying to basically look at of course, I indicated that Ghana, in terms of the economy was performing well prior to the COVID pandemic. But then this particular slide is trying to also look at the surfaces underneath, even the period before the COVID. What I mean to say is that even before the COVID, there were some risks that actually we could look at. For example, we had some heightened macro volatility. We had low revenue mobilization, which has been with us since time immemorial. And then also, of course, escalating debt levels. We talk about how we came by these debt levels, higher debt level, and also, of course, weaknesses in PFM systems all together. So even though, of course, I know that most of us here have been following the narratives in terms of how the economy was not that strong before the COVID, and the COVID has actually magnified those problems. And this particular slide is actually trying to demonstrate that. For example, we know Ghana is represented by the green line in the left graph, top left, and realize that Ghana, amongst its peers or comparators, Ghana's debt to GDP ratios was high, interest payment high, as well as also when it comes to, if you want to contrast it with revenue generation, Ghana's revenue seem to be low compared to its comparators. So all these definitely put some form of vulnerability on Ghana's economy. So the COVID-19 just pushed Ghana down as far as its macro is concerned. Now, having said these standards, I want these contexts, I want us to just look at recent developments, and for this, I want us to look at the 2021 performance in particular, which gives the full year, and then I'll include the mid-year as well to it. So as I indicated, 2020 was quite bad as far as growth is concerned, but then there was a rebound in 2021 when growth went up to 5.4%, and which was led by agriculture and services. Of course, if you look at the expenditure side, you would notice that the growth was actually also driven by government expenditures, and is actually logical based on the fact that from 2020 all the way to 2021, we saw government expenditure going up, and so definitely that explains in terms of expenditure level how expenditures actually impacted on growth. Now, I've mentioned the outcome of 2020 fiscal deficit, and we know that for 2021, the fiscal deficit still remain quite high compared to the fiscal rule ceiling, which has been abandoned since 2020. We saw that in 2021, government attempted to embark on fiscal consolidation, which is was quite significant, of course. When I say significant, I'm trying to look at where we came from 2020, 15.2%, including financial sector and energy sector costs for 15.2%, and we went all the way down to 11.4%. That is close to 4 percentage point decrease within a year, which is quite significant. But then, of course, it's not enough to take us way down. This is actually a source of risk, which we will definitely discuss later on, as far as how much time we have to actually recover from these levels of fiscal risk. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is that even though the reduction of the fiscal deficit was quite significant from 15.2 to 11.4, it's not enough to take us where we want to, and will require time to do so. Not just time and effort. This slide, basically, I would not spend too much time here, but it's basically trying to explain why we don't, or we seem to be performing poorly as far as the fiscal is concerned. Mainly the fact that we keep expenditures high, but then at the expense, of course, knowing that we have lower revenues, we still keep expenditures high. So the bottom line is we have to go borrowing, and that is what has put us into the debt situation that we are now. So this particular slide, Ghana is represented by the red bar, and you notice that in 2021, the revenue to GDP was 14.7, compared to some other countries and some other comparators, Sub-Saharan Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, Kenya. We seem to be lagging as far as revenue performance is concerned. So basically, we are not raising enough revenue, and we are spending so much within years. So this particularly results in higher fiscal deficit and also higher debt accumulation. This slide, well, the previous slide is one of the reasons that we have been in terms of the fiscal deficit and debt. This slide is also one way that will demonstrate why we are at this level. And this particular slide is talking about the energy sector. And I know that we we've been hearing, we've had the narratives as far as the energy sector is concerned. But in my attempt to actually bring this to bear, the graph here is actually looking at the shortfall of revenue as far as cost is concerned. So we are saying that the energy sector is not financially sustainable. We have sector costs exceeding revenue, resulting in annual direct subsidy requirement from government, or from whatever, about $1 billion since 2020. So basically, this is as a result of one, excess power generation capacity and gas supply contracts. We have underpricing of electricity and non-cost recovery tariff. And also we have poor and deteriorating performance of main distribution company, which is the ECG. So regarding the excess power generation, currently we have a capacity of 5 gigawatts, which far exceeds the peak demand of 3.2 gigawatts. So of course, we know we've been hearing the expression take or pay, which means that there was contracts that more or less would add up power capacity to Ghana's capacity, and these contracts were take or pay, meaning whenever they finish their contracts, the country has to pay for it in terms of the capacity that has been built. So either you take it or you pay it. There is some minimal cost that the country has to bear as far as those installations are concerned. I think there are more details to this, but then of course, I think if you have access to the energy sector recovery, not the energy sector recovery levy, but then there is a program in place that actually spells out all these problems. And I think if you have, I'll mention the document, and probably we can look at it later on. In terms of underpricing, what this means is that currently we have about 55%. The tariff that we pay for electricity is about 55% of how it costs to produce those power that we consume. So basically, the government for some time now has agreed to pay some part of these gaps that have been generated, but this is not enough. So basically, I'm mentioning this because it's really a source of fiscal risk, because each year government has to pay a lot for basically electricity that we are not consuming. Government has to pay a lot more like subsidy for those using power, and this is actually one of the reasons that we've had fiscal deficit higher, and also the debt accumulation ongoing. Now, having spoken about that, this is a graph that indicates the level of debt as of June 2022. We saw debt increasing rapidly from 55% of GDP in 2016 to as high as 61% in 2019. But between 2019 and 2020, we saw a very huge gap, increase, more than 10%, about 12% increase as far as debt to the percentages, as far as debt to GDP ratio is concerned. And this is basically the situation that we are in now. And of course, we know that this has come out of exceptional spending levels and also low revenues in 2020. In 2021, of course, we've seen the ratio stabilize around 76.6%. We've seen investors and agencies having raised concerns. Of course, at the beginning of the year, just last Friday, we saw Standard & Poor's also downgrading Ghana's performance. We have seen external debt amortization needs not well. we will talk about this later, but then for the point I wanted to make about external debt amortization is the fact that currently we don't need to do much as far as amortization and debt repayment is concerned. When I say not much, I mean compared to the next 2 years when some of the euro bonds will be due to pay, we are not so much stressed. But then in the next 2 years, if the situation that we have continue, then really we are going to be stressed as far as amortization needs are concerned. I think I'll move on. I wanted to give more details as far as the end June debt stock is concerned, but I think we can move on. Also, of course, this is also supporting the previous slide, indicating that we've had gross financing needs going all the way to 25% between 2020 and 2021, higher than IMF, DSA benchmarks. Also, the fiscal and the debt repayment amortization and other needs are actually quite high. Interest payment has absorbed 30% of budget expenditures, for example, in 2021, and so on and so forth. Now, going into debt sustainability, one statement that I need to make here is the fact that debt sustainability is really a key concern. And if some of us may have followed or may know the current situation regarding the sustainability of Ghana's debt, the last time that the IMF World Bank made a joint DSA was last year, July. We have not updated that. I think this will be done in the next few months. But then if you go back to that DSA results, the DSA then indicated that Ghana's debt was sustainable, but then of course was at high risk of debt distress for external and overall. But then there was a very strong caveat that if Ghana's debt will continue to be sustainable, then Ghana needed to have very strong fiscal consolidation going forward. Growth had to remain high, and also Ghana would have to retain market access. Now, since then, we know the developments. We've seen Ghana losing market assets, fiscal consolidation not too strong enough, and so on and so forth. So your guess is as good as mine, but then of course we still have to wait for an outcome of a DSA to actually determine how the status is. Moving away from the debt situation, let's go to the monetary situation, and we know that inflation has reached almost 2-decade high, close to 30% in June, and I believe we are yet to have the July numbers, probably today or tomorrow. And the situation is that even beyond 2020, when we had COVID, we saw pressures mounting, especially at the beginning of 2022. We've seen food prices, we've seen the core inflation itself accelerating and showing some broad-based acceleration in terms of all goods. And also we've seen imported inflation actually pushing also hard. So basically the point that we want to make here, for example, is that the Bank of Ghana, of course, had reacted by pushing its interest rate twice this year, but then this has not been enough to actually stabilize or bring inflation down. And that the reason is when it comes to imported inflation, there's little that, for example, monetary policy as far as inflation targeting can do to actually halt And when I say little, of course, this is actually a whole topic that can be discussed, or a whole thesis topic that we can all discuss later on. But basically, this is the observation that we've had. We've seen the inflation. I mean, we've seen the bank hiking its interest rate, but then we have seen also inflation going on and on. And this actually is attributed to these external shocks. We have the CD depreciating as at July, per the Bank of Ghana numbers, almost 20% from January to July. At the same time, if you compare the same period last year, it was less than 1% depreciation. So that's how much the gap has been as far as the performance of the CD in 2022. Moving on to the external sector proper, we are looking at the fact that in 2020, the external position was resilient regarding trade, and this was mainly as a result of strong non-oil commodity exports. But then in 2022, we talk about the projections later, but basically what we need to note here is that even though the COVID impacted growth, it also impacted imports. Imports reduced, so naturally we had quite good trade balance in terms of which also impacted on the current account deficit. We also had more in terms of flows, financial flows. We had quite encouraging flows between 2020 and 2021, which also impacted on the gross reserves. So at the end of 2021, for example, the gross reserves stood at 9.1 billion, equivalent to 4.4% of GDP. But then this has actually changed between January and now, especially because Ghana has lost market access. There's not much as far as hard currencies coming in. We've also seen quite a lot of foreign participants of the local bond market also exiting the market. So all these, and of course the pressures on the exchange rate, the BOG has had to use a lot of its reserves to actually manage the exchange rate situation. So we've seen the reserves coming down quite rapidly by mid-year of 2022. Here, I will not spend too much time. Here, basically, we can link the next two or so slides with my earlier slide, which was trying to communicate that even before 2020, the economy has some risks that had to contend with. And here, you are trying to compare Ghana's performance over the years and now with other countries. So, for example, the first graph on the left is looking at real GDP, with Ghana has been doing well. First of all, Ghana is represented by the red line across all, the next three slides. So you see Ghana rapidly, in terms of the per capita GDP from 2000 to 2021, rapidly increasing, and this has been as a result of robust economic growth over those periods. But then, if you look at real growth, we are in between somewhere. Not so bad. I would say that among the top performers, especially if you want to look at beyond 2015. Now, revenues efforts have been lower and also inflation has been high. And here we are. If you look at the two graphs, the one on the left represents revenues, and Ghana seemed to be one of the lower performing countries as far as revenue performance is concerned. And this, if you look at the period 2000 and 2021, Ghana has always not been performing that well. In terms of inflation, we've seen Ghana's inflation high over the period, and even has actually, except for Ethiopia, amongst the countries that we chose to compare with, we realized that Ghana's inflation from the end of 2021 till date have actually gone up rapidly, and we have already mentioned some of the causes of that. Now, of course, the fiscal deficit, and I'm sure we would all remember the narratives that we've had in the media and so on, and even in the political scene. We realized that Ghana's fiscal deficit, for example, in 2020, surpasses all the comparators. At the same time, our debt has, and of course that explains why our debt has also soared compared to all those countries. The next few slides will just give update on the mid-year. I know that the main topic for this discussion is the mid-year, but of course it was also important to look at where we've come from, and so we understand where we are, and then of course that will form the basis on discussing where we want to go to, or where we are about to go. Now, for the year, the fiscal for the first half of 2022, we have seen significant revenue shortfall, which of course has led to the fiscal deficit above the target that was set for the mid-year. We also have seen the government financing from the Bank of Ghana to meet increased financing needs. We've also seen high inflation, which has also, which is feeding into GDP deflator, of course, and also allows for 2022 fiscal deficit to be revised downwards. We have seen some major revenue initiatives, such as the e-levy, having ambition to drastically reduce in the face of implementation challenges and so on. So the first half of 2022 hasn't been that smooth. And of course, as Evans was indicating or quoting the finance minister, they still are not meeting their expectations as far as the fiscal or some aspects of the economy is concerned. So we've seen the government revising its projection from 3.7%, down to from 5.8 from in the budget 2022 budget originally to 3.7%. And we've also seen the fiscal being revised downwards. Of course, the explanation to this is that we've had higher GDP, the denominator. So basically, it does not mean that the government is doing well regarding revenues or expenditures. Yeah, so the next slide gives some updates. I know most of us have already seen, and I've already mentioned them, revenues falling short, and expenditures being higher. As a result, the government have also revised the 2022 fiscal framework, indicating that there will be, if you look at the original budget, we had higher revenue, but now we are going to have much lower revenue because the e-levy, for example, has been cut down by 90%, and many more other revenue sources have also been revised downwards. At the same time, the government has also revised expenditures downwards to go with the revenue. This slide gives some snapshot of the original budget and the revised budget and the sources of financing. So you realize that the finance, mostly we will see amortization not changed. The government is going to rely more on Bank of Ghana financing, about 1.4% of GDP. Originally, they didn't plan to do so. Of course, they are going to reduce commercial banks or DMBs financing of the budget by about 1% of GDP and so on and so forth. We can discuss more when we get to the Q&As. Now the outlook. I must say that from the World Bank team, we are yet to do or update our projections based on the mid-year budget. So what I'm about to present here will be basically what we had done before the mid-year budget, and also, before the mid-year budget was concerned. So, for example, we had projected an average of 5% of GDP growth between 2020, 5.6% between 2022 and 2024. This was quite lower than what the government was projecting originally. But then as we speak now, government's projection is also quite low, about 4.8 now, based on the mid-year review. So we are working on, we have some time frame that we actually update our projections, and it'll be interesting to know the outcome of this. So this is actually to show you our initial projection in terms of growth. It was quite lower than what the government had initially projected for. And our initial, the issues that we actually indicated as basically in terms of what was informing our projection was that we know that there were some lingering impacts of the pandemic, especially in China, that was ongoing at the first half of 2021. We also have risks of inflation. We know that the bank, but already the central bank has increased its interest rates to 19%, about 4 percentage point right from the beginning of the year. And we know how much this impacts on growth. So all these informed our projections at the time. So going forward, since of course the impact of we are feeling the impact of the Ukraine war more, and also we have more data regarding the first half of 2022. So likely in a few weeks' time, we'll be able to come out with all these projections with the new numbers. The same way, in terms of the fiscal, we had projected a fiscal deficit of close to 8% in the next 3 years, compared to the government's less than 7% in the original budget. And of course, this also we intend to update based on the current situation, based on the current data, and so on and so forth. For the external sector, we projected current account deficit will remain elevated, while access to external financing will be constrained, and this basically we hold to it. Now, with the outlook, we still think that the war in Ukraine will severely have a setback of the global economy, and that will be transmitted, or based on what we've experienced in the first half of the year, will continue to be transmitted to Ghanaian economy. So basically, in terms of growth, we have that risk of basically, if we fail to have that, in terms of the fiscal and also the debt, definitely we have that risk there. So we are definitely going to have to depend on domestic capital markets for financing, and this will drive interest rates, of course, and also limit access to credit. You are in the space, and basically in our discussion, we can talk more in this area. And of course, we also have the risk of fiscal slippage. The government has done a lot in terms of curbing expenditures, of course, but then they don't have much to do, or much choice when it comes to revenue. So they will have to still be strong in terms of reducing expenditure. But then, of course, this is also linked to growth, because as you remember, I indicated that in 2021, growth was also related to government expenditure. Now that expenditures will go down, how is that going to also impact on growth? So these are the dynamics that we need to look at. Now, having said all these, what are the things that government should or could consider to actually help sustain the economy going forward, in terms of the macro, in terms of spending, in terms of revenue, in terms of the monetary side? And regarding the macro, we think that the government should engage in decisive and sustainable fiscal consolidation. We know that they have indicated some spending and revenue measures. They should religiously go with it. And here, probably I know I've been silent with the IMF program, but here, probably I should indicate how much in terms of bringing these decisive sustainable fiscal consolidation efforts and supported by the upcoming IMF program, and that would actually help a lot in that area. And also in terms of spending, they should continue rationalizing some contingent liabilities, continue efforts to strengthen control on statutory payments, and also phase out COVID-19 expenditures, which of course they have already committed to. But then of course they should also protect some well-targeted support to the vulnerable, and also rationalize the active portfolio of public investments, so that in terms of commitment, they should actually look at what they have committed to as far as public investment is concerned, and postpone some of the other things that so that based on its strength in revenue, they can actually continue with them. And also reduce contingent liability risk from the energy sector, and so on and so forth. In terms of revenue, they should reduce tax expenditures via the implementation of the exemption bill, and also in terms of widening the tax base, they should also intensify the property tax rate, which I know that the government is currently helping the local government to implement on pilot basis. So on the monetary side, well, the BOG should continue to monitor the impact of price pressures on inflation expectations. Also, to maintain policy credibility, BOG should continue to adjust forward guidance on the monetary stance. So basically, what we are saying is that they have to also be a bit more transparent when it comes to the price. Their stance when it comes to their engagement with the market and so on. That will help in terms of carrying out some of the speculative activities that is impacting, for example, on prices as well as also on the currency. I think this will mark the end of my presentation. My next slide is actually looking at a much more long-term policy choices that I wanted to share. For example, in terms of the business climate, also access to finance, connectivity, and access to basic service. And having shown this, I'd like to bring my presentation to a close and hoping to discuss more on areas that is much of interest to everyone. Thank you. Hold on. I think that I should have indicated right from the beginning of the presentation that I have two of my colleagues that are connected with me. So David is a senior economist at the bank based here in Accra. My other colleague, Sally, who is also an economist, and mostly I will let them answer I've done the easier part of the work by presenting. I'll let them do the most difficult part of the presentation, which is answering the question. So David and Sally, thank you for connecting, and thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. Over.
Well, thank you very much for such an unbiased view of dissecting the economy in a very sort of unbiased and neutral way. I've always been under the impression that if the economy in Ghana is going to get better, it requires a forum like this where we ask the most difficult questions, the uncomfortable ones. So for me personally, the first time that I sort of looked at, I've had an unbiased view like that, related to me. Guys on the call, this is like a rare opportunity to ask the people who sit on the other side some of these tough questions. So if you want to sort of ask a question, you can please raise your hand, and we can sort of bring you on stage to ask questions directly. But before that, Kwabena and the team, we've got some questions that has been sort of presented in the chat room. And I'll go through that. I have some of my own questions as well. So, but let's prioritize some of the ones on here. I actually learned quite a lot from that presentation, and I think we need to ask some of these difficult questions. So the first question comes from Nanaboma, which is, are we likely to default on the local currency or on the Eurobonds debt? Which one, from where you said, which one are we likely to default on?
Can you, are we likely to do what? Sorry.
Default on the local currency bonds or on the Euro bonds, given where you sit? Default,
okay. Yeah. Do you want to read more of the questions so that we can take them?
Yes, so that's absolutely fine. So that's the first one. The second question is, should we expect a successful IMF discussion leading to a cash flow from the IMF? If yes, are we likely to see, when are we likely to see the end of that negotiation? So in terms of the timeline of the IMF. We have another question from Edward Ajman, who says, from where you sit, what do you anticipate to be the main anchor of the planned IMF program? And what will be the outlook of the financial sector given the country's history of the IMF program? I think that's a very important question. I had something similar as well. Edward sort of added another one, which is given the domestic financing, given the domestic finance that has increased, is there a rate of default on the part of the government with rates going quite high as inflation? I think it's quite closely linked with the first question. There are some more. I think you should take these ones, and then I'll gather the next branch of questions.
Okay, let me take these few ones, and then I'll let David come in. David, is that okay? Okay. So in terms of possible default, I think that it's difficult to actually make a definitive answer to this. But then, of course, in terms of the risk is still high, and the reason, of course, has been the fact that first of all, revenues, it's just a condition that we are in, right? We lack access to the international financial market, which is a source of financing and also refinancing, which has been the case for the past decade. And also revenues have not been performing well. Even within this year, we've seen auction failures in many of the auctions that government had embarked on locally and so on. So there's definitely a rollover risk in terms of course, adding up to the rollover risk in terms of foreign participation also dwindling or demands from the foreign participation. So the risk is quite high. but then it will be very difficult to give a very definitive answer to this. Of course, a much brighter side could be that going forward, if revenues, it's the second half of the year, if revenues could improve and government stays on course regarding controlling expenditures. And then, of course, for example, the 2 billion term loans that government is talking about comes in, then there is some form of breather as far as this area is concerned. But then, as I indicated in my presentation, there's much more demand coming in the next 2 years. So definitely, all things being equal, the risk will heighten, except that, of course, if we bring in a change in the market sentiment, and of course, we know how this can happen in terms of policy credibility, for example, from the fund, as well as some other policy implementation results that may come in the next 2 years. So that is one way I would want to answer Nana Brahma and my other friend's question on that. Regarding the IMF, where the IMF, the anchor will be, I think that we all know that the debt situation is not encouraging. So basically, that is where we may expect something to come out of. But then, of course, there are many ways of dealing with the debt situation: fiscal consolidation, debt reprofiling, debt renegotiation, and so on and so forth. So these are the areas that we might want to look at going forward in terms of the program is concerned. In terms of the timeline, I think that the fund is coming in the next couple of weeks to specifically look at some revenue area. I know most of us heard it, I think 2 days ago, about yesterday, and also, yeah, I think so. So definitely they are working in the background, but then in terms of the timeline, we are looking at four months or let's say 6 months or less. David, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Kwabena. No, I mean, really, like, I think you answered the questions very well. First of all, let me actually thank our hosts for the invitation. Really appreciate it. And regarding the IMF, program timeline and the main anchor, like, first, we need to stress that it's a matter for the IMF and for the authorities exactly what they will agree on and so on. But no, I think Kwabena said it pretty well. The timeline, it will be in the next few months. A program does not happen overnight, so it will require at least a few months, I believe, of negotiation and designing the program. And in terms of the anchor, I mean, I think the main objective of the program will be to restore debt sustainability, like to make it stronger, one way or the other. So and again, the specifics will be left to the authorities and the fund, and it will be very interesting to see exactly how this is agreed upon. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So I've got a next batch of questions. I think from my side, it was very interesting to see how Ghana compares with the peers in terms of revenue generation. I think historically we haven't been very sort of good at doing that. Based on where you say it along with David, is there any areas that you think are easy wins that the government and the country can sort of tap into that could easily help with that revenue generation? So that question is from me. We've got a question from George Allen. George says, what is your view on the central bank's approach to addressing the Ghana cedi depreciation? In your view, what should be some of the immediate measures to addressing the cedi depreciation aside from the BOG monetary interventions? And then the third question, we've got it from Eric Apea, who says, how did the financial bailout play in the current debt situation? How do you expect fiscal policy to change with the IMF, and which sector may be most impacted. So you should take the 3 questions, and if there are any more, we can address those.
Okay. I think I did not get the last question, the last part of the last question. So if you can repeat that.
Yeah. So the last question says, how did the financial bailout, which was in 2019, I believe, how did the financial bailout play in the current debt situation? As in, did it have any impact at all? Because when you see, I think it was on page 10 of your presentation, where we saw that revenue had remained quite consistent, but actually there was a huge amount of social spending. And the question relating to that one says that, did they have any impact on that situation? And how do you expect the fiscal policy to change with the IMF, and which sector are most likely to be impacted?
Okay, thank you.
And in fact, let me add the fourth one, which has been posted by Eric Apia in the chat room as well. He said that, David, to your comment on debt consolidation, can you have a debt consolidation without debt restructuring in the current environment? So you can
okay. So I'll pick them in no specific order. I think in my presentation, I indicated some of the choices that we could look at as far as revenue enhancement is concerned. So I'll still probably go back to it and indicate some of them. For example, we are looking at I think that we have a public expenditure review, World Bank public expenditure review. The last time we had that was I think 2018 or so, and we estimated tax expenditure like exemptions and what I mean, tax exemptions. Of course, we all know that, and it amounts to about 4% of GDP over the years, right? So basically, if of course, and we all know, we can attest to the fact that we have different laws, different institutions that give tax exemptions, from GMPC, Ministry of Finance. We also have Parliament and so on and so forth, giving their exemption. We need to consolidate the law and also streamline it to actually avoid a lot of the losses that we have there in that area. We also, of course, know how much value property tax is and how much we are losing in that front. Currently, we know that the local government depends solely on District Assembly Common Fund, which is not enough. And if we should actually use the current dispensation in terms of digitalization and so on and so forth, to identify properties and properly tax them, that will be an area that definitely would actually free up some form of revenues for the central government, especially looking at the local government as well. Of course, in terms of compliance, there are many options that the government has already indicated they will work on. They have to continue with it. For example, they need to be more more intelligent as far as a taxpayer database is concerned. They have to conduct better business intelligence. All these are not in place as we speak. So there's a lot low-hanging fruits that the government can actually use to actually broaden the base, well, instead of just introducing new taxes or increasing tax rates. In terms of the fiscal sector bailout, the financial sector bailout, and how it impacted I think that we know the numbers. We know that, for example, the bailout costed not less than 20 billion Ghana cedis, and all these, how did it come about? The government, of course, raised bonds to pay and so on. So it's a one-on-one addition to the debt, the Ghana's debt. So I mean, it's as clear as it is, and also not just the financial sector, the energy sector as well. So both sectors actually played a lot of role as far as the ballooning of the debt is concerned from the beginning of 2018 to date. And regarding how the fiscal policy will be run on, I mean, it's as simple as we can prescribe, live within our means, cut waste, expand the tax base, and that would actually help attain a primary surplus. Because I mean, attaining the primary surplus is logically a way to go, because that will mean that you are not borrowing money to pay your debt. If you have a positive primary balance, at least you have enough money to foot your debt as far as the fiscal year is concerned, and definitely that is the way to go. As long as we keep having negative primary balance, that means that we are accumulating debt, and this is not happening. In terms of the current projection, we are not going to have a primary surplus this year, so that is the situation for now. I think, David, I'll leave the monetary one for you, and I can support on that. And also the debt consolidation choices. David, can you please help out on that?
David might be on mute.
Okay, you're on mute. Okay, all right. So I think David said I should. Okay, with a point on debt consolidation choices, I indicated in the presentation earlier on. First of all, there are two sides of the coin. There's the external and the domestic, and there are risks when it comes to restructuring and so on, especially if you want to look at the vulnerability of the financial sector now. I mean, in the context of where we have come from regarding the financial sector bailout situation and all that. So it's quite interesting. It will be quite interesting, the choice that government has to make regarding the process of the IMF. Be able to indicate, I can only spell out the choices available, but then the actual work will come from the work, looking at the data, the risks, the vulnerabilities. Of course, if you look at the external, for example, no investor wants a haircut, and therefore it depends on how negotiations go and so on. So I think that is the best way I would want to answer this question, in terms of let's wait and see the best way Ghana, but then the choices are really tight, and it's going to be difficult as far as the choices that we have to make in terms of how to consolidate the debt. Of course, having said that, I need to indicate that since we are talking about debt restructuring and so on, I need to indicate that fiscal consolidation is another way of making debt sustainable. But then in Ghana's situation, we think that fiscal consolidation alone may not be possible to do that in any foreseeable future. So, of course, I think I can throw the ball back to us for us all to conclude that we need to do some debt situation. I mean, debt work to be able to actually bring the debt to a sustainable path. I think that I've answered. Yeah, the monetary choice.
I can step in. Like what I was trying to convey is that I could not unmute myself. The
Okay.
host has not given us this power, so I could not speak. But no, I mean, thank you very much. You took almost all the questions. So I think it's only left with the monetary policy and the CE depreciation and the action of the central bank. Look, it's kind of hard to know, to judge alternative scenarios where the central bank actions would be different. Would you have more depreciation, less depreciation? But I think the central bank has a very tight rope to walk, a very tight path. Because basically, yes, you can intervene and support the city to some extent. However, that depletes the reserves, and the reserves are an indicator that a lot of investors and markets look at. And if the reserves go too low, people are going to get even more averse vis-a-vis Ghana and vis-a-vis Ghana's bonds, etc. So you can only intervene so much, and you do have to let go and let some depreciation happen. But so basically, I think that these interventions in the forex markets have to be seen as sort of a temporary, a stopgap measure that cannot be a long-term thing because reserves run out. What needs to, I think, really, in terms of the measures to implement, it's really measures to restore debt sustainability. I think that if you have a credible plan to restore debt sustainability, and as Kwabena explained, that may entail debt restructuring, that will likely entail fiscal consolidation. And if in the long term you can make the case that, Ghana is kind of, the public finances are back on track, the debt is serviceable. And, it's kind of hard without doing all the numbers to know how far from the mark Ghana is, but that's totally achievable. At least we believe, it's achievable in the medium term to get back to this really debt sustainability. I think that then you shift the whole dynamics, and you make Ghana much more attractive. You can finance the debt more easily. The pressures on the city will lessen. You will still have inflation. Inflation is a global phenomenon. That depends on things that are beyond Ghana's control, way beyond Ghana's control. It's affecting countries everywhere. You will still have monetary policy tightening and increased interest rates. That will be adverse factors for the city. But that's why we would argue Ghana needs to do what it can at home for its debt sustainability, for its public finance, because that it can control. So yeah, I think those are the important points. Thank you.
Okay, David and Kwabena, thank you so much. Okay, everyone on the call, please. A link has been sent and shared in the group to do a mini survey to get your feedback on this session. But before we go, I think we pull one more question, which is an interesting one. It's been ongoing over in the country over the last year, and it says that do you think e-levy should be scrapped, maintained, or revised based on its current structure? Considering its current impact as well. As an outsider or someone who's neutral and looking in, we're talking about revenue generation. Historically, a country where, compared to our peers, our revenue level has been significantly low. Yet, I think the issue that we're seeing is that a lot of people feel that the impact is going to go toward the same percentage of the population who are contributing to the little sort of taxes. So based on where you sit, what is your view?
So I can get started to give Kwabena a break because he's been talking a lot. I think Adjei, you asked the question about revenue, saying are there quick wins, and I think this idea of quick wins maybe is the problem in a way, because the e-levy was, I believe, conceived as, in a way, a quick win, something that could generate revenue tomorrow because you have this volume, this tax base, which is the volume of electronic transactions. You take a cut, 75 percentage basis points, 50 basis points, and you say, okay, that's going to be my revenue. That did not work out like this. We know that the government has scrapped the target by 91% for this year. So obviously something went wrong. And I would argue, like Kwabena was saying, that the solution for revenue is unfortunately a long-term solution. You need to address exemptions. You need to improve the property tax. Unfortunately, those are long-term reforms, but the good news is that once you've set that in place, you improve your revenue for the long term. So you improve the trajectory, and obviously, as you do that, you really have to focus on the like the fiscal incidence, what was called the tax incidence. Basically, who's going to pay, and you have to make sure that fairness is respected, and that those who pay are those who can pay, and that it's not like the poor people who are affected by those measures.
Thank you very much, David, for that answer as well. In the interest of time, just to make sure that we're not taking too much of the time. I've got one last question in the group, which I think we should sort of touch on, and then we can sort of move on. In fact, there's two, and it is again touching on. In fact, you partly answered that question, which is, rather than looking for quick wins, we should be structuring the economy to aim for a more sustainable revenue generation sort of approach. And the question from Hakeem who's mentioned that, compared to our peers, is there something that they're doing that is allowing them to sort of mobilize a little bit more higher percentage of revenue compared to us? So that's from Hakeem. And then we've got another one from Jordana, who's saying that the point on the issue of a quick win, apart of the quick win being part of our challenges. In fact, I think he's just reiterating on the issue that you just sort of addressed. And we've got one last one from Eric Apea, who's saying that how do you attract long-term capital into private markets without some of the exemption due to the onerous tax legislation we have in the country?
So let me try to take on those two quickly. So on the first question, what are the good techniques, the good way to do tax mobilization? The first sentence of Anna Karenin's book, Tolstoy's book, like all happy families look the same, whole sad families are sad or unhappy in their own way. So basically, there is no secret what a proper, effective tax administration looks like. It has like proper systems. The tax code is clear, it's streamlined. Exemptions are very limited, and you have a lot of transparency on how much exemption you grant, for what, and to which effect. What do you get for the money you pay, so that like Parliament and the public can make a call as to whether they think it's a worthy use of public money. Because in the end, like there's this illusion around the exemptions that it's money you don't collect, so it's money you never really had. No, it's money you should have had, and you should think that it's public spending, as when you take money that it's in the treasury and you use it to pay for a road or to pay for a social transfer. Here you give it to a company. So maybe it's justified, but the cases, and that's the second question, how do you attract long-term capital without exemptions? So there is a lot, like a very broad literature about the effectiveness of tax exemptions and tax expenditure to attract investment. And the evidence is mostly against tax exemption. It shows that in most cases, it's not effective. It doesn't attract long-term capital. Like companies come, either they kind of game the system and they change name, or they change their status every 5 years or whenever the exemptions are supposed to expire to continue benefiting from the exemption, or they leave when the exemption regime stops. So you can have some very specific cases, which honestly I don't remember here, but where exemptions well targeted, well designed, based on based on some very specific
to GRA's status in terms of compliance and auditing, right? They have, for example, the customs data, then we have the domestic tax data, which don't speak to each other. So basically, you can have an importer having paid X amount of VAT, import VAT, which probably should actually inform how much the value of sometimes the transaction locally is concerned and so on. You can't have that, right? I mean, in real time. So that's one aspect. So one area which I think the GRA currently is working on is an establishment of a data warehouse of taxpayers, where you can have even a database of all possible taxpayers, even those that are not registered with GRA. Is a situation where a typical situation where someone may import a Ferrari and still doesn't have a tax identification number. GRA can actually reach out to their person and give presumptive tax as far as the person is concerned, because you can't be in a vacuum. You can't own a Ferrari and not pay taxes, right? So that with data warehouse will pull a lot of data from DVLA and many other, from banks, many other situations, sources, and analyze and actually identify people. So that's one area that GRA has been working on, and we hope that they come in as fast as possible to be able to deal with some of these things. So one area actually is compliance and auditing, which we have not been doing well with. Over.
Okay, thank you, Kwabena and David. And as I mentioned, in the interest of time, I think we would like to sort of wrap it up here. I'd like to sort of offer a huge, thank you to everyone who has attended. Kwabena, David, and the team for taking the afternoon to come and share the sort of ideas with us. Special mention to the people behind organizing these events, 3A events, and we have a huge amount of organization sort of go through putting this together. And I would like to sort of referring back to what I said in the introduction of these sessions. We need to get together more often in these sort of forums and asking the most difficult questions, because ultimately at some point some of us will be in position to be able to make a contribution in terms of changing the direction of the course of the country. So I'd like to thank you all for joining, and we shouldn't stop. CFA Society Ghana, thank you very much for hosting this, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.